A few weeks ago, I received a wonderful email from a new friend of mine called Saraswati Panchira. And in the middle of it, she asked two questions. And one of the questions particularly fascinated me. And we corresponded with each other, and I have her permission to use it as a reading today and to identify her as the author. My big question about life here on planet Earth: why has it been arranged that life must live on life, that something must die for something else to live? It seems such a strange way to have organized things that I've often wondered if it isn't the root cause of all the difficulties we face. Words inspired by God and channeled by Saraswati. I spent 8 years in the seminary training to be a missionary priest in Africa. And for the last year particularly, we did a course which was called Community Development, where it teaches you how to go into a strange place, different culture, learn strange language, look at the customs of this new culture, and also to try to figure out what the needs of the community might be. So you're trained to go in, identify what are the resources there, what are the problems there, who are the leaders there, and how you can set about helping people, to meet their needs, given the resources they have, and maybe resources you can bring in as a missionary from, in my case, from Ireland. And so I get to Africa in November of 1972. I learn Swahili, and I got my first appointment to a big sprawling parish called Eldama Ravine. Some of my outstations were literally 90 miles from the center. So I'm sitting at a meeting of the Wazee, the elders, one day in the middle of the Baringo Desert, sitting on rocks outside, and I'm trying to figure out how I can be of most benefit to this community. And so I start off and I say, I realize you guys, you're the leaders here. I know what the needs are, particularly water needs. I have resources I can get in Europe, and you have resources here. So let's start brainstorming about how we can deal with this problem here. And during my kind of dissertation, there's one old man who was kind of looking kind of bemusedly at me. And finally he raises his hand and he says, "Can I ask you a question?" And of course, I'm Irish, I'm 26, I know everything. Sure, fire. And he says to me, "Why is it that for you Europeans, your only response to a problem is to want to solve it?" And I'm thinking, dude, what do you do with a problem except solve it? So I'm stuck. So I said to him, "What do you do when you have a problem?" And I will never forget what he said to me. We're talking in Kiswahili, but more or less what he said, "A problem is an invitation to self-transcendence. And if all you do with the problem is solve it, life will just give you another problem. And if your only response to the second problem is to solve it, life will give you a third problem." And I think I learned more in that encounter than I had in 8 years of seminary training. And that's what I want to build upon today, the notion of self-transcendence as a problem-solving mechanism. It doesn't mean that we don't solve our problems, but it means that we can solve problems from the same mindset that created it, to quote Albert Einstein. And so I want to continue the theme that I began to develop last Sunday. Last Sunday, I put as a theme for the month of July the notion of incarnation and evolution. And today I want to continue on that theme. And so I'm basically going to make 3 main points this morning. Firstly, I'm going to do a very brief recap on what I said last Sunday. And then for the second point, I'm going to take up Saraswati's question and kind of make a response to that. And then thirdly, I want to talk about a notion that I call a preconception contract. So that's where we're headed today, God willing. So I want to recap very briefly then what I said last Sunday. And to begin with, I have to define what I mean by consciousness. This was a definition I got in a dream a few months ago. And I'm wrestling, what does consciousness mean? In science, it's called the hard question. And what I was told in the dream was that consciousness is source-saturated self-awareness. So that's what I mean when I talk about consciousness, a source-saturated self-awareness. Then the theme for last week was, I called it rebuilding the body of God. And I talked about incarnation and the difficulty that there are 4 limitations to incarnation. The first one is that we who are cosmic beings have to now operate in these tiny little spacesuits that we call our bodies. The second is that we've got this tiny little laptop, the kind of meatware that we carry between our brains to try to grok the gestalt of life. The third thing is that we have to create the illusion of time, because the brain is so small that we can't understand the totality of our experiences. So we have to break our experiences up into bite-sized pieces and process them sequentially, thus giving rise to the illusion of time. That's the third limitation. And the fourth one is amnesia. We forget who we are and why we've come. And the second thing I said about incarnation was the twin purposes. Reincarnation is the way in which, and incarnation is the way in which God experiences. God generates experiences through her creations, what the Hebrew mystical tradition would call netzotzim, the sparks of the divine. So that's how God generates experiences. And incarnation is how we as human beings learn to outgrow our identification with this skin-encapsulated ego. So they're the twin purposes of incarnation. And then I talked about evolution, and I talked about the notion of convergent evolution, that the same genetic code will create similar kinds of creatures in similar kinds of environments. But when the same genetic code finds itself in radically different environments, it creates totally different kinds of creatures. And so for me, that's what evolution means. It depends on where the code lands. And the ultimate code I suggested is not DNA, it is logos. It is the word of God. And I talked about the 3 drivers of incarnation. I call them self-awareness, free will, and technology. And then finally, I spoke about the notion of apoptosis. Apoptosis is a biological mechanism whereby all of our cells die off on a regular basis and are replaced by brand new cells. And when we fail to do that, we develop cancers of various kinds. Cancer occurs when a part of the body refuses to let go, to give up and to die and be replaced by fresh cells. And I suggested that happens embryologically before the baby is born, that happens biologically in the course of the day, that happens even socially in our social constructs, and it happens spiritually. So that's where I went the last day. So I want to continue now on that theme today, this notion of rebuilding the body of God through a proper understanding of incarnation and of evolution. So I want to pick up then in this brilliant question that Satisfati posed. And I'm going to read it for you again. It's very, very brief. My big question about life here on planet Earth. Why has it been arranged that life must live on life? That something else must die for something else to live? It seems such a strange way to have organized things that I've often wondered if this isn't the root cause of all the difficulties we face. So I'm going to make a response to that. I tried to make a response to that this morning, Saraswati. And I'm going to look at it, a cosmic kind of development, a planetary development, and then I'm going to look at the spiritual aspect of that, and then finally come to a kind of a conclusion about it. So cosmically speaking, unless the first generation of stars went supernova, the next group, which includes our sun, could not even have been born. And the heavier elements necessary to birth biological life would not have come into being. So from the word go, even cosmically speaking, it was set up in such a way that the old order has to pass away and die in order for a new order to be born. So the first generation of stars go back about 14.6 billion years, and they lasted maybe for 5 billion years. And then one by one, they all went supernova. They exploded. And then they created other elements, the heavier elements, that then began to aggregate. And we got the second generation of stars, of which our star is a member. It's only 5 billion years of age. And so life, biological life, could not have emerged from the cosmos if it hadn't been for this old order dying away, even violently dying away through supernovas. And this process continues, on a cosmic level as well. We continue to get, in the cosmos, planetary collisions. We get meteor strikes. We have solar flares, and we even have polar shifts, messing with the magnetism around the planet. So it seems like the cosmos continues to evolve with this extraordinary dance of shedding the old in order to give birth to the new. So that's true cosmologically, we see that happening. We see it happening, at a planetary level on our own planet. I believe that, Hinduism talks about the 7 levels of the body, that there's the physical body, and then there's the etheric energy body, and then there's the astral body, and then there's the mental body, and then there's the causal body, and then there's the soul body, and then there's, cosmic consciousness or a Brahma consciousness. So the planet itself works its way through those 7 stages. So in some senses, Pachamama, or what we call Gaia, is simply the physical articulation of a great, great, great soul, which continues to evolve through these very different stages. Now, I think, the planet, operates in the very same way as human beings do, through different levels. So as I look at it, it looks like the planet right now, we see it in its physical form, but beyond the physical form, it developed an atmosphere. And the atmosphere was like the womb in which life would be conceived and birthed. So the very atmosphere was the second stage, which was necessary. Then came the third stage, the biosphere. Now we got plants and we got animals and marine creatures. So that only could come about because an atmosphere had been created from the physiosphere. There's another stage that Tyler de Chardin called the noosphere, a sheath of consciousness that surrounds the mere biosphere. And that's where we're headed at this stage. And things like the internet is an effort to create that kind of planetary consciousness. But there are 3 stages beyond that a lot of people don't recognize. And the next stage beyond that, I call it the animosphere. We're moving into the realization that the planet itself has a soul self. And beyond that, I call the pneumosphere. Beyond the soul self is a spirit sphere. And ultimately then, there is Brahmanic consciousness or Christ consciousness or God or source, whatever word you want to give to it. So even the planet itself continues to shed previous versions of itself in order to develop and bring us with us into this realization. Now on the planet then, it goes through this by apoptosis, killing off dead cells in a sense. So 541 million years ago, there's what geologists call the Cambrian explosion. Suddenly, there was this extraordinary surging of life on planet Earth. New life forms that had never been existent before that came into being. This huge, big uptick. And then about 300 million years after that, about 250 million years ago, it's like God decided to weed the garden, to do a planetary apoptosis. And in the Permian Extinction, 250 million years ago, 90% of all life on planet Earth died off. In the oceans, trees, plants, animals of all kinds, 90% of all life forms died off 250 million years ago in what's called the Permian Extinction. And we see the fossil record of that. And the planet continues to kind of reorganize itself. What we talk about, problems of various kinds, volcanoes, tornadoes, forest fires, tsunamis. These are the way in which the planet continues to reorganize its own cellular, system. And so rather than seeing it as problematic, it's an invitation to us to work with that, at an individual level and on a planetary level. And in this system, we see the following. We see, for instance, that plants, which we think are the most innocuous forms of life, in a sense, but plants live by eating sunlight. And then herbivores live by eating plants, and the carnivores live by eating the herbivores, and the omnivores live by eating the carnivores, and then bacteria live by eating the omnivores, including the ultimate omnivore, which is humanity itself. And so this is not a food pyramid. It's a food cycle. It goes round and round and round. We human beings are not the king of the castle. We are, if I were to kind of phrase it more poetically, we are a section of a flowing stream whose destination is the ocean, only to be recycled as a mystical vapor to once more water the mountaintops and begin the cycle all over again. And so in some senses, cosmically and at a planetary level, that is the purpose, of this life needing to eat life. It's true at a spiritual level as well. When you think about it, wisdom lives by demolishing ignorance, and love lives by overcoming fear. And so then in some senses, life as we experience it is a dance of love's two children. Love has two children. The first one is light, and light freezes into produce matter. All matter, physically speaking, when you study the science and the physics of life, all matter is simply frozen light, frozen photons. So that's the first twin. And the second twin is logos. And logos it's like the master potter which fashions matter into an infinite number of forms, all the way from daffodils to dinosaurs, and from anemones to archangels. So this is what the logos does, it fashions matter. And when I talk about matter, I'm not just talking about physical stuff, but about the constituent elements of being itself. And so love has these twin children, light and logos, that dance life into being. And then ultimately our job is to laugh at the illusions of time and space, at our self-deceptions and our fears. Because the evolutionary journey goes from the densest, least self-aware to the ultimate, subtlest, most self-aware that we call God, or we call Source. And so kind of to wrap that up satisfactorily, for me, I look at the word rachamim in Hebrew and in Aramaic. Rachamim is translated as mercy or compassion, but it's based on the Hebrew word and the Aramaic word rachem, which means a womb. So compassion means womb-likeness. And so a womb is that which can conceive and carry and birth, sequentially, not just once. And therefore, when Jesus Christ says, you must be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate, what is the compassion demonstrated by God herself? It's a compassion of continually birthing more and more elevated and more evolved versions of life, until finally she gives birth to herself. And so Meister Eckhart would say very famously in a Christmas homily one time, he said, of what use to me is it that my God was born of a virgin, 1,300 years ago? If he's not born again in my time and in my person, every single one of us is meant to be a mother of God. And that's the ultimate, destination of this trajectory, rebuilding, I call it rebuilding the body of God. And so I would, if I were to define compassion today, I would say that compassion is the mystical art of weaving what is, of leaving what is, in order to give birth to that which seeks to be. That is compassion. The ultimate compassion is having the courage and developing the mystical art of leaving what is currently in order to give birth to that which seeks to come into being. So that's the cycle of life. It's not a pyramid, it's a cycle of life. That's my second point. So let me go on now to a notion that I developed many years ago, that I call a preconception contract. I really believe that groups of souls, soul pods, migrate from incarnation to incarnation, almost like an acting troupe. It's like you created a Shakespearean group in your town, and this year you put on Hamlet, and next year you put on Macbeth, and the year after that you put on A Midsummer's Night Dream. It's the same group of people, but they're playing completely different roles. And the object of the exercise is for people to develop their acting skills and to entertain the audiences. Now, that's what incarnation is, and that's what reincarnation is. We tend to reincarnate with the same troupe of souls, but we're going to play radically different characters, reversing roles very often, like my father in one incarnation could be my sister in a subsequent incarnation. And built into that preconception contract are the notions of karma, fate, and destiny. And I want to try and differentiate between the three of them. Karma is the lesson plan. It's what you hope to learn in the course of an incarnation. And you set that up before you arrived with the soul troupe and also with your heavenly mentors. And so karma is what you were born to do. So karma is not a punishment for mistakes you made in previous incarnations. It's the invitation to become more of what you could be, to develop compassion in the sense in which I just defined it, the mystical art of leaving what is in order to give birth to that which seeks to be. So that's what karma is. Fate, then, F-A-T-E, is where our karma should lead us if we follow, what our lesson plan should be. So that's what fate is like. Destiny is different. Destiny is where it will actually leave us if we don't follow the mission that we came to perform. So it's a big difference between fate and destiny. Fate is where it should lead us, if we're in tune with our karmic lesson, and destiny is what happened when we make the compromises between the ideals and the values that we have. So that's the first thing I would say about the preconception contract. Part of that preconception contract is that life is a psychodrama. It's like improv theater. Improv theater, you don't have a script and you don't have a plot. You just have characters on stage and they're given an opening sequence, and they're going to have to work with that. Psychodrama is a kind of a style in psychology where you're working with individuals. Say, let me as a psychologist, I'm working with maybe 4 different individuals who are, each of them has their own particular issue. But in order to really dig deeply, I need to see these people in a wider context. What are they like within the family or their friendship group? So psychodrama is a system. Let's say I invite 4 people in. They're all working on their own individual issues, which are distinct from each other. And I put them on stage and I create an artificial scenario. I say, here's the drama we're going to create. You 4 on stage. You are going to be the father in this family and you're an engineer. You are the mother in this family and you're a very well-known artist. You are the son in this family and you're the jock. You're the quarterback for the football team and everybody loves you. And you're the daughter in this family and you're doing drugs because you're overshadowed by your brother. And so right now you've been kicked out of school for a week and your parents have been informed. So now you got 4 people on stage: mother, the father, the son, and the daughter. And there's no plot and there's no script. There's just the initial circumstance. The daughter got kicked out of school for a week. Now you get on with it. What are you going to do? Every one of the 4 people on stage is going to have to draw upon their own real life experiences in order to make some kind of an intervention or make a statement. And the others will respond to that on the basis of their own life experience. Now that's what a preconception contract looks like. It's a psychodrama. There is no plot. You didn't come in here with a script that you have to mouth or lines that you have to learn. You came in here with a group of people. You found yourself in a period of human history, in a particular family, in a particular culture. And now you're going to have to draw upon your experiences of previous incarnations where your soul has gotten you to at this stage and respond to life accordingly. And in order to do that, you then have to consciously create what I call a personal cosmology. And the personal cosmology is basically built upon 4 questions. The first question is, what do I mean by God? The second question is, who do I think I am? The third one is, what do I mean by neighbor? And the fourth one is, what is my mission? And we have to work consciously on that. And an adequate personal cosmology must do 4 things for us. Your personal cosmology must be totally unique because there has never been another you. Even in previous incarnations, your soul was the same, but the character you're playing was different. So it must be unique, this personal cosmology. It must stretch you out of your comfort zone. At the same time, it must make your heart sing because you really know at a soul level, I'm onto something important. And fourthly, you must regularly update it on the basis of new experiences that you're having. And in order to do that, you're going to find yourself as part of a community of various kinds, whether it's companions on the journey, or it's a book club, or a golf society, whatever it is. Now, a proper community should do 2 things for each of the members. A real community should encourage the individuals in their search for truth, and it should challenge them in their beliefs. And it has to be reciprocal. If this model is not so reciprocal, if the individual is not encouraging the group to search and challenging the group needs, then what happens is that the community becomes a cult and the individual becomes just a robot. So we have to keep challenging and supporting each other in this journey. And then finally, to encapsulate it for me is this. I would say that somebody who was unconsciously evil is simply asleep. Somebody who's unconsciously good is simply lucky. Somebody who's consciously evil is pathological. And somebody who's consciously good is enlightened. Be consciously good. Namaste, my brothers and sisters.